Hello, and welcome to the Stepping In podcast. I'm your host, Adam Klein, managing partner at New Ventures West. And in this episode, I'm joined by Joel Monk from Coaches Rising. In my conversation with Joel, we look at the coaching profession, all the different styles and ways coaching can show up in the world, the different ways that supports clients. And then we turn our attention to looking at what does it mean as a coach to continuously be looking at our own growth so that we can better serve our clients. I found it to be a really enthralling and enlivening conversation. I trust you will as well. Look forward to hearing from you. Stepping in at newventureswest.com. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Joel. How are you today? You've had your day, or a good portion of it so far.
I have, yeah. Pretty good, thanks. Yeah, it's been quite a busy day because my daughter's still off school because it's the school vacation. So I had her, and then I was doing a bunch of other stuff in between. So yeah, but I'm doing very well, thank you. Yeah, in good spirits.
Yeah, how old is your daughter?
She's just turned 5. It was her birthday yesterday. So
oh, how fun!
Yeah, and we have a 17-year-old in the house. It's quite interesting. Different dynamics at play.
I'll say. Wow. Yeah, we have a 12-year-old, and we just started the school schedule. We're in week 2 now.
Oh yeah. Oh cool. Yeah, America goes. Yeah, the US seems to go back a bit earlier. Yeah.
We used to go back later, and then all of a sudden, in the last, I think maybe 5 years or something, earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's nice. I like moving back into the school routine.
I'm looking forward to it. Very much. Yeah.
It's like, we had the unstructured. That was fun. That was a good time. Okay, the structure should be nice.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And remind me, where are you? Are you in Denmark? Do I have that right? Or?
No, I live in Amsterdam.
Amsterdam,
just on the edge of Amsterdam. Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's right.
Yeah. I'm from the UK originally, so yeah. I'm guessing you're like San Francisco area-ish.
Yeah, area-ish. Yeah, I'm in our office today, which is in San Francisco.
Yeah,
and then I live about 30 miles north in a little town called Petaluma.
Oh yeah, sure. I was up in that area, Sonoma, like visiting Samuel Bonda. Went to stay with him for I don't know if you know him. He's a teacher. He's quite cool, actually. But he lives in that area. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area.
Look at you.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful area.
Yeah.
Well, I thought I don't know if you looked at the notes from the previous time. I thought we could just kind of use these as a guide.
Yeah.
And one of the places I was curious to start, Joel, is really even like contextually for people listening to this episode who may not know you. What brought you to coaching originally? What's some of the backstory for you?
That's an interesting question because there's a simple answer and then there's a slightly more elaborate answer. What happened was I was actually a community artist and a DJ, so my lifestyle was quite hedonistic, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And it was a lot of fun, actually. But one morning I woke up and I burst into tears and I just knew that I'd lost touch with myself. And so I sold all my records and went on a pilgrimage to India and spent, I think, 6 months there, mostly hanging around with the Tibetans, deepening in my practice, or starting to deepen into meditative practice.
Was that your first exposure to that, to a life of practice in that way?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I was about 23, 24, and I'd been going to the Krishnamurti meetup groups, funnily enough, before that, which was interesting. But Krishnamurti doesn't give you much to go on in terms of practice.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, they were cool people. What Well, anyway, I'll just keep it super short, but it is interesting. So when I was in India, I was really, became a Buddhist and was really practicing. And I came out of seeing the Karmapa one day, who's quite a, prominent figure in the Tibetan tradition. He'd been giving a teaching. And then there was these two guys there, and they started challenging me about why would I, cut myself off from the world and meditate. And I got really triggered. And in that moment, I decided to hang out with them. And they introduced me to all these things like Neo-Advaita teachings, like the more you practice, the further away you move from the truth of who you are. And I actually had a kind of mini awakening experience from exploring that. But what happened was, by the end of the week of hanging out with these two guys, I felt like they turned my world upside down so much that I was like, oh, like, I hate you. And the
Yeah,
last
thanks
thing they
for
mentioned
right.
was Ken Wilber. And by that point, I was like, I don't want anything to do with anyone you mention next. And then it was through getting into Ken Wilber at a later date on a retreat where I came across his book. It was an outdoor retreat, and his book just kept on showing up. I tripped over it coming out the shrine tent, and then I sat next to it, and I was like, "Oh, there's Ken Wilber again! Get away!" But when I started reading his work, everything, I was in an existential crisis after this mini awakening experience, and just like it was a complete loss of identity, and um, just really trying to find my sense of ground again. And Ken Wilber answered all these questions that I was wrestling with in his work. So I just felt I lit up like a Christmas tree. And then I discovered developmental psychology, and then this thing called coaching. And so that was a slightly long answer to your question, but yeah, it was amazing to come at it through that route, because coaching felt like it encapsulated everything I was passionate about.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. To me, it feels like I don't know, long, but more like a full answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I, I was wanting to bring in some context piece because, we're going to talk about coaching and
Yeah.
what's the future and all of that. And as I was sitting with the theme of our conversation was just feeling into, well, it might be helpful for us to share a little bit about like, what's the context that brought us here? Because that's going to certainly inform even how we orient to some of these questions we're wanting to explore together. Um, yeah. So my pathway in is not, well, it's parallel in some ways in the fact that I came into it through more of a spiritual trajectory as well. So I remember, in the US, when you're 18, you graduate high school, then you have to like decide, what are you going to do? What are you going to do in college? What are you going to study? And then what are you going to go on to like make a career in? And I didn't really know. I had many things that I was like kind of good at, things that I enjoyed, but really, and I remember this very distinctly. I remember exactly where I was. It was in the basement of this. It was actually a church, and I said, I just really want to help people become who they are. That's what I want to do. But I had no frame of reference for like what that would actually look like, how it could be practical. So I went on to study engineering because that was the pragmatic thing to do, and I could see like, oh, I can make money doing this, and maybe do something alongside people inside of that. But it was in graduate school that I had been doing different things in the more like fringe sort of mystical arena of Christianity, and was
Mm.
doing my graduate studies and kept hearing this little voice inside that said, this isn't it. Engineering's not it. Do something else related to more full on with people. So I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I had a friend in San Francisco that I had been connecting with over the years. So I moved here. We started a little intentional community, and then a nonprofit called Reimagine, which was all about like a center for life integration and how do we integrate things like justice and creativity and simplicity. And it was there then that I started to think about like, well, what could I do? How could I do this not in a nonprofit context, but more in a more like market-based context? Because I was doing consulting work, computer consulting to help pay my bills. And people there were very interested in this other part of my life. They're like, what is this thing you do on the weekends and these workshops that you lead. So then I got introduced to coaching. And I'm curious to know a little bit more because you said you found coaching. My first introduction to coaching was like, I don't think this is it. My first taste of it was more, it felt like it was going to exacerbate someone's suffering rather than help it.
I'm very curious what you were doing.
Yeah,
What's
well, it was more like, how do we get people to just accomplish things and really achieve? And I could tell based on the work I had already been doing that that might be helpful for some, but it certainly wasn't going to be helpful for everyone. So then I started looking around more, and I found the Enneagram. I had been studying that for many years, and I thought, oh, if someone includes the Enneagram in coaching, maybe that's a place to go. And that's ultimately how I found New Ventures West.
beautiful?
Yeah. So when you first encountered coaching, what was that like for you? And you mentioned it briefly there in that like passing comment, but
Yeah. Well, I ended up moving in with a guy. I was a Buddhist household. I'm not practicing Buddhist any longer, but I was back then. And he was a coach, and he was also like a counselor, Rogerian counselor. I remember when he did some counseling on me, and I was like, "Whoa, like what? It's like a magician, Like
yeah,
he's
yeah,
just
yeah.
totally. I feel completely seen by this man. So yeah, he had a lot of depth to him. So I was quite lucky to meet coaching through him, and so I just started following my nose really in terms of what were the trainings in Manchester where I was at the time, and there was a coach training based on like NLP and creativity stuff, and I just so I was just kind of grabbing hold of what I could at that age, but it wasn't long until I discovered Integral Coaching Canada. I actually have never trained with them, but I started to become inspired. Doug Silsby's work had a big influence on me because actually, I'd say the practice that really started to have an influence on my coaching was a practice called circling, which has since gotten quite bigger in the world. But back when I got into it, actually it was in the Bay Area that it really started out. But, other than that, it wasn't much of it going on anywhere else. But yeah, I was like, oh, this is the modality where you can really practice being in, relational meditation with another person in a way that unlocks thriving, aliveness, a certain kind of growth. So yeah, by dropping the change agenda. So that the mix of things just started to kind of influence me, and Robert Keegan's work, of course, just had a big influence. But I didn't until Jennifer Garvey Berger's work didn't really get a sense of how can you apply that to coaching. So yeah, it's kind of an eclectic journey for me, really. Yeah, but yeah, it's quite lucky, I think, in that sense of I didn't. Yeah, in what you're describing, I didn't have too many kind of negative experiences around it. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was just that initial one. I was like, I'm not sure this is it. And then, the more like I said, hung
Mm,
in there and looked around, I thought, oh, this is quite a wide field,
yeah.
which I know I've heard some of your podcasts is coming up, and it even comes up in our schools. Like, well, is coaching really the best word for some of what people are doing? I don't know. We can get into that maybe later, but
Yeah.
and that's I think part of our conversation with that to bring in is like, given the wide spectrum of coaching, like what sense do you make of that?
Yeah. Of what do I sense of make
Yeah,
of?
of like given the given the for some, maybe put it this way, because I have people asking me like, is coaching what I should be doing in terms of like not necessarily training, but like looking for a coach, or do I need a different kind of modality? So how would you support someone in navigating the like wide spectrum of what coaching is if it's something that they were interested in pursuing, either as a client or as someone wanting to train in it?
That's a great question. I mean, there are like there are several schools I find myself recommending, including New Ventures West. Like I just often would be like, okay, because a lot of people reaching out to me about with that kind of question actually are, I can, because they know me via the podcast, and I could kind of tell roughly what kind of coaching. And I just say, hey, you've got to find a school that really speaks to you. But these are the 5 or 6 schools that I really recommend. And but then, yeah, if I step back from that, it's a big question, really. Yeah, I think it depends on who the person is and what they're looking for. I do feel that, I know of Steve March's work, and that's had a big influence on me in the more recent years. And I think he's articulating very beautifully some of the wider transitions that we're making on a societal level, and therefore what impact that might have on the work we do as coaches, what it means to be a coach. And that's why I've been exploring the topic beyond coaching as well. Playfully, really. I'm not attached to that phrase beyond coaching. It just kind of came up and then it kind of stuck. And, I've been getting a bit of pushback for it. And I love coaching. So I'm not trying to say like coaching's not it. I'm not trying to create the next new shiny thing to sell people either. It's just more like, what are some of the deep beliefs that coaching was kind of based upon originally, and what do we need to question about that, just as we're doing in society wide, So I'm not sure I
Yes.
answered your question there,
No,
but
yeah, you did, and we could pick up that thread you just named. I think of oh, I just lost it. Coaching and what is it going to become? I guess in the world
yeah,
these days, and in what ways? Oh, this is what it was. What was it built on? What was coaching originally built on that may be needing to be, at the very least, looked at freshly
yeah,
and possibly let go of? And I know one of the questions we were entertaining in our conversation that's connected to this is like what current worldviews are becoming more clearly broken.
yeah,
I think some of them have been broken for a long time. It's just that it's more prominent.
yeah,
The clarity of it is more clear, is more present.
yeah. um it's interesting, just to preface answering those questions, that like I spoke to David Drake recently, and he met with John Whitmore and Timothy Galway. So, two of, not the only, but two people who had a real influence in what coaching became. And I think one of them coined the term coaching. And I don't know if it was Timothy Galway who wrote The Inner Game of Tennis, Um, and they were like, we don't like the word coaching actually, but it's stuck, That's what they were saying to David Drake. Like we never intended that word to, I thought that was a fascinating thing to hear. I was like, because when you put a name on something, it has such an imprint on what it is and how it's seen. So, um, I think the first thing I'd say about that question about the deep beliefs, I think and I want to tip my hat here to Peter Lindbergh, who's a friend of mine, a colleague, and influenced by his thinking. Is like success, So, in a sense, like this is very like generalistic, I'm just caricaturing here a little bit to make a point, but in some ways coaching is based on becoming successful at something, like getting something one wants that one doesn't have, like whether that's and it's some more forms which are more, I don't know, superficial, about chasing goals in some way, or even certain ways of being that one might have. But I think what's becoming more important is becoming wiser. And that's not to say being successful isn't a good thing, but for me, like becoming wiser, like what if coaching really started to orient people to developing wisdom? And I think, that's to say, I think it does already. Yeah. So in certain ways. It's not to say no coaching makes people wiser. Of course it does. But yeah, I think a lot of clients don't come into coaching because they want to become wiser. Like success has a lot of credence in our current worldview, and by success we often mean status, monetary success. Uh, and I think some of these things are inherently problematic, but when you situate them within the current kind of capitalist system, which again, capitalism, I'm not critiquing that as a thing per se, but the way it's been deployed around the world, and it seems to just extracting resources at an unsustainable rate and stuff, then I think from that view we can say there's issues with it, and that you will have heard this before too, Adam, but how are we just coaching people inside of organizations to maintain the status quo, when the status quo isn't sustainable and isn't making people feel happier, or do we as coaches need to be provocateurs, one foot in what's emerging, one foot in the current worldview, to be challenging? So yeah, that thing from like success to wisdom, I think, is interesting for me as a belief. And then I could I'll volley it back to you now, but just to tee up, like, I think, what is it to be a human being? Like, actually, we've inherited this idea of what it is to be a human being, but it's very like hyper individualistic and separate, and I think that has many problems to it, and I think that's actually breaking down right now, and it's something new is emerging. But that's what a lot of coaching seems to be about. It's like, how can I improve my solo self to become more successful in the world? And again, there is some nice things to that too. It's not black and white, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely have clients that come in with that topic, said in different ways. And then there's also some who come in, not, they don't use this language, but it's more like, how can I feel more at home in my life or more at ease in what I'm doing? Like, everything is so crazy. My work is crazy. And then I have family life that's demanding, and I have all of these demands. And I can't keep going. What do I do? So I think it's back to this question you brought in, like, so what does it even mean to be a human being? And questioning some of the premises that we hold as true about, like, what's important, how do we utilize our energy and our time and all of that, which is big. Those are, huge questions to ask, especially when you're in existing systems that perpetuate a particular answer, which
Yeah.
I think is where the rub comes.
I think that's a really fantastic point. Like, I know in the past I haven't given that enough space inside of my coaching, that we, yes, there, and it's get back to my prior point. We're here with this individual on one level, but we're so deeply interconnected within these systems. And, like it's very intense right now. There's a lot of complexity and a lot of stimulation, and maybe these systems aren't ontologically designed in optimal ways, and that's what's being challenged right now. So yeah, I think there are certain practices and ways of being that we can take on as coaches, and we can invite our clients into, that can help us to navigate the intensity of our times. And in fact, I think we're in a dojo right now that's actually inviting that kind of practice and evolution. And it is a crazy world, and yeah, it's a lot to conduct.
It is. It is. And I've been reading this book by, well, he's a Catholic priest and then also a Hindu, Raymond Paniker. I don't know if you're familiar with Raymond Paniker.
No, yeah, cool.
So he's really fantastic and deep. But in the book I'm reading now, Rhythm of Being, he's speaking about how these questions we're in don't have a singular answer. So also, like, in the question of what does it mean to be a human being, something I've been sitting with is, so what then does it mean to have a diverse answer to that question, rather than sometimes the mode I can find myself in, which is, oh, well, we'll inquire into that and then we'll come to an answer that's for everyone.
Right.
And he's like, you can't, because we're all in different contexts and you can't remove. That's why I wanted to start with our own context, because we can't remove ourselves from that. So our answer is inherently influenced by many, many factors. So what is it like to have a diversity of answers to this question? What is it to be a human? How does it to be alive these days? So that's an interesting question, especially from a coaching standpoint of like, how am I coaching this person in front of me? And am I coaching them or am I coaching me? And
But Adam, what I really like about what you bring up is actually I feel relief hearing
right.
that. You know,
Yes. Isn't it relieving?
it's like ah, okay, yeah. I don't because we're so trained to find that next answer, and maybe that's also another one of these beliefs that coaching's based on. Again, again, I'm caricaturing coaching to make a point because I think a lot of coaches would really resonate with this idea of not coming to one answer. But yeah, I just feel this sense of relief, like there's multiplicity that can be possible in any moment that I can take on, and like it doesn't need to be the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe as we're in this conversation, one of the questions that's occurring for me is, because we're kind of touching on it already a little bit, but what are the shadows of coaching?
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, would you feel like sharing one first? I've got some ideas, but
Yeah, I'm happy to share one first. My sense is, well, we've kind of been talking about one, which is having people become more successful. So the shadow of performance and enhancement and progress kind of can be built into the whole modality in some respects. So to me, that feels like um, a thing to be aware of. And is it okay to? No, we don't have to progress. You don't have to change. Nothing needs to move here. And that, like, I can imagine just having that be on someone's website. Yeah, come to me as your coach, and nothing. We're not going to do anything to change you or shift anything. Everything's fine. So that's on very far extreme, but I feel like that's an inherent shadow that is so antithetical to even think that, or to have that be explicit. Like, whoa. So to me, that feels like an edge to pay attention to, and I think it's coming in more. I know we include it here, and I know other schools are including more of this. Like, well, let's be mindful and very conscious about everything not having to be about performance and improvement. And the and you named it in the capitalistic mode of that progress really is a myth. And what happens when we let that go? The myth of progress. So I think that's one. Um, yeah. Anyway, so I'll pause there and I'll hand it to you. We can maybe just kind of go back and forth here.
yeah. Well, just to build on what you're saying, I think you've named something so important there. That sense of the improvement agenda that we can get caught up in, which can perpetuate this sense of lack. At its core, it's like where we are right now isn't enough. So we need to get somewhere else, and then it'll be okay. And actually, that's just there's a often subtle but sometimes like very palpable tension with that. The sense of deficiency. So that I think is quite a big shadow, of coaching at times. And um, yeah, so I'm glad you named that. Really, in a way, I think I've already named quite a number of the shadows, like this approach. I think another one is reducing transformation to like a simplistic set of heuristics, or like we can codify it. We can
Mm-hmm.
really codify, and there's value in maps and codification, but I think that's one of the things we're being invited into. Really, is like to live inside of a living realization, a living unfoldment of being human, and or like growth in inverted commas. So I see that as like it's there's so many assessments about and maps and models and competencies, static competencies,
Yeah.
and yeah, they're getting challenged a lot right now.
I'm smiling because it's funny. I don't know if you ever scroll on LinkedIn, you see all of these, like a lot of these models and modalities and those little infographics. And then you'll see the same one with like in different colors and different branding and the also way in which, oh, that one's catching on. So you see it over and over again, even though it's touted under different names and different things. I'm like, but that's the same thing. So this, yeah, I agree. I hear you. And I see it as well, this shadow of, well, we just need the right technique or the right method or the right framework or the right fill in the blank, and we'll
Yeah,
find it, and that'll be it.
yeah.
And then the other part of it is then touting that as the solution for everyone.
And one's coming to me. It's kind of a shadow. Maybe it's more of an ethical dilemma, but um, maybe sometimes like an over exaggeration of the benefits. Now,
You
I
mean that
think,
coaching is going to make you experience enlightenment and nirvana, and you'll be happy for the rest
yeah,
of your life?
and just and what we're going to be able to accomplish. Now, this I think coaching is incredible, by the
Yeah,
way, and
yeah,
I think it can unlock incredible things, and actually is just so amazing for people to have long term coaching. And I've that's the way I've grown the most in my life, and it doesn't sometimes it can be kind of portrayed as happening in this very like mechanistic linear way, that but for me it doesn't work like that very often. It's like it's like seeping the transformation, the change is like seeping in the back door, and unbeknownst, and like it sudden jumps where I go like, whoa, where did that come from? And
exactly. Yeah,
it's like I can't directly attribute it to like one specific moment per se, but it's also undeniably connected to the coaching work I've done. So yeah, there's maybe we need to be like a bit more humble, and yet also really own the magnificence of coaching. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And for me, our conversation really, to me, feels fueled by like the impact coaching has had for each of us, our love for the field, and the questions and conversations are kind of out of that place. So these
yeah,
wanting to talk about shadows and not critique, but come in with questions. That's the place I feel like we're coming from.
yeah,
So there's one I think that's connected to this as we're talking about it, and it's a whole other thread, but I think there's also some connection to this shadow piece, which is um, like the big concern about AI. How's that going to impact coaching? And to me, one of the tangential pieces of that might be some of the shadow of coaching is like the economics. So part of what I hear in the AI conversation is this going to um, have coaches become unemployed? There's many other dimensions to it, so I'm not simplifying it to that. But I do am curious about this one of the like the sort of economics of coaching and other ways that it's been talked about is like, yes, it seems helpful, but it also seems to be for a very select group of the population, not so widely available. So that's to me another shadow is the whole economics of it. And in fact, just maybe a couple of weeks ago, there was an article in the New York Times about therapists moving into coaching. And one of the reasons is because it can be more lucrative from a financial standpoint. So that to me is also something I feel like is getting tossed around in the whole coaching space and wrestling with this question. And I'm wondering for you, what you see in that or thoughts you have on it.
yeah. It's so I think what's interesting is there's how AI will impact the economics of coaching, but then how AI will impact our economies, and then even just the wider, broader economic disruption that we could potentially, maybe we even already are moving through in the next decade, So, linked to the conversation we've had about growth, perpetual growth, and our resources. And if you listen to people like Nate Hagens, who talks about the great simplification, it's a very confronting thing to hear about how our economic world systems are actually tied to energy, and it's actually about energy. But anyway, so yeah, again, there's no right answer to this. So, like, on the one hand, am I for coaching, the democratization of coaching, and people, like, absolutely, I love that. And also, am I for coaches getting paid well? Do I like to get paid well? I do. So there's not one answer to this. Um, we've done some podcasts with people who are quite prominent in the field and with AI, and I feel like maybe we've just passed the hype peak a little bit of AI, and that's not to say that it isn't going to keep exponentially improving and blow our minds, but somehow, like, the cracks started to appear in the initial hype wave of, like, what it's going to be able to do. Like, I noticed some of the news articles in the last 2-3 months starting to challenge some of the claims. And anyway, so that, because I'm saying that because I think for a while I was quite pessimistic about what's the impact it's going to have on coaching, because it does seem like they'll be able to create AI coaches that will have access to every coaching theory out there, and we'll be able to draw upon that. But it seems like it's still going to be, of course we know, and I'm not an expert on AI by any means, but it's not alive, it's not relating to the human being in front of you. So it's only able to respond in a particular way, like looking back and drawing upon knowledge. And I think that will serve people. So I think AI can play a role in democratizing coaching. I had a conversation with Nikita Blanche, and that was one of his big hopes, is that, for people who are never going to be able to afford the kind of fees coaches I know charge, they're going to have access to AI coaches. So that feels potentially like it could be positive, because I think there's a lot of caveats as well about AI coaching. We could get into that maybe. I'm not all in favor of AI coaching by any means. Like, I'm very skeptical, and I'm not like resistant to it either. I'm kind of trying to be open and just play with it. But yeah, I think a lot of the things we've already talked about, like, what is a human being? What are some of the deep beliefs and values we base our societies on? And what are the problematic ones that have been based on a modern worldview? They're getting baked into AI. So they're going to accentuate a lot of the challenges we have. But I do think there'll be a place for human coaches still. Like, that's my feeling right now. But the economic model around coaching, I don't know. There's going to be a commodification of coaching. There's going to be a McDonaldization of coaching. I mean, I just don't know. But I think it behooves us to do the deeper work, the deeper kind of training that you guys do at New Ventures West, where it's really about your being and the deeper spiritual elements of our humanity. And yes, so we could get into that, but anyway, again, I kind of weaved in a lot of different perspectives there. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's
feel free
fantastic.
to, yeah.
Yeah, I would echo some of the things you said about it helping some of the democratization and becoming more accessible. I mean, even though it isn't, I don't think, intelligent, it's, statistical models, from what I understand, just putting things together. Um, it can be quite helpful in many respects. And I do think there's significant limitations like you're pointing to. And one of the things I'm curious about is, even in its helpfulness, we're in the midst of from some things I was just reading and studies that have been done in the midst of like peak loneliness, or I don't know, peak, but accelerating loneliness. And what's it going to be like to now interact with the screen rather than another person, even though it might be saying things that are helpful? Is that really going to be helpful? Or is it going to be just more cognitive distinctions that still have the person feel distant, not connected, and isolated from others? So that's a big curiosity I have around it. Like, and to me, one of the things I think AI is revealing, back to the thing we were talking about, like frameworks and the right technique, I think it's going to reveal that that's not what coaching is.
100% with you there. Like, that's the thrilling side of it,
Right.
actually. Just to, I don't, it's pretty bleak, and I don't want to spend time here too much, but to think that, more and more of our interactions might be with the AI avatars that seem human-like, whilst we're consuming art, that's created by AIs. And what, I've been reflecting on that. There's something about the transmission of eros and create evolution that comes from live living beings interacting together, and that sense of emergence that comes. And what happens when a lot of that's happening through AI generated content? Like, do we, at first it seems okay, but then after a while we start to feel even more down and depressed and lonely because we're consuming like McDonald's grade art and interactions. Now, I don't know if it will definitely be like that. Then there's going to be a lot of positive things coming out of AI. But back to your point, like, the positive side of this, I really think is it's going to suddenly put it right in our faces, like what's actually beautiful about being human and what we actually need. These human to human interactions and contact and intimacy, and this kind of eros and aliveness that can come through two human, and the novelty and the emergence that will come from two or more human beings together. That I think could be huge when that starts to dawn on us more and more, because the other side of it is getting louder and louder, and we're getting less and less fulfilled.
Right. Exactly. And to me, I think it reveals one of the essential things that coaching is up to, which is having people be in contact with their own aliveness. Like, what's the life inside of me that's only going to come through me because I'm only here once? And how does that live through me and get expressed in the world? To me, that's the fascinating thing. And I think AI will reveal, like, oh, it's not a model that helps with that. It's a
Yeah.
much more, as you were pointing to earlier, it's a much more mysterious process, and one that can't be done in isolation.
That I think is where we're being invited as coaches to enter into the magic and the immediacy of the moment of being with another human being, and the revelation and the unfolding that can occur. Like, there's a way I wanted to put it, but it's, yeah, that's yeah, beyond, like, if you think about AI, I think one of the things we're being invited into is like, we're coming out of an era where we valued knowledge a lot, and like knowledge and analytical, like breaking things down into their parts and measuring them, and I think in a way, like, that's getting baked into AI. That's what it does. It can look back over all of our accumulated knowledge and then kind of estimate what the best answer would be. But the most exciting coaching sessions I've been in with master practitioners and the communities I've been in is like beyond that space, what you're pointing to, where people are really just letting go of a change agenda, just dropping into the moment with another human being. Now, they might be calling upon beautiful distinctions that they know, like the Enneagram, but that's not in the lead. That's in the background. What's in the lead is this like living sense of contact and aliveness, the felt sense of being human with another person, and that there's a kind of intelligence that comes online and can guide that sense of evolution taking place. And it becomes even less about me being the coach coaching you, but actually, life evolving through us in this moment. Now, there's an art to that because I'm still a coach and I'm still holding space, and you might be still paying me, but I'm participating and even revealing impact of what it's like to be with you, because I don't think AI will be able to reveal that kind of impact. It might from facial recognition and tone of voice, but it'll only be referring back to all the data. But as another human being, I can be like, as I'm with you right now, this is what I'm noticing. This is what I'm feeling. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautifully said. I think it's pointing to that we are alive beings and we're creative beings. So as we come forward into the world, we're not going back into some model that which is AI is drawing on. It's fresh. It's new. It's never been done. I'm me, and the me in the next second isn't the me that I was yesterday or a second ago. And in fact, if we go off of prediction models, it kind of hems people in like, well, this is what you were doing yesterday. This is how you wrote yesterday, which is one of the ways AI does things. It's like, oh, yeah, this is your tone of voice. So this is how you should say it again. That feels so limiting.
and I wonder, I hear now like large coaching organizations, they're developing their own AI, and even maybe using coaching sessions to from within their organization to then codify these AI coaching platforms, or coaches. And but then if that does have the impact that less and less people are coaching and more coaching is done by AI, that evolutionary tone that we're talking about, I don't know what's going to happen to that. Is AI going to start to suddenly come up with new novel ways of coaching? It might do. Again, I want to be careful to say that no human being will ever get beneficial regulation and contact from an AI, because I know that's already happening, like from
Sure, sure.
studies I hear. So, but yeah, again, it comes back to if more and more stuff is created by AI and we're just consuming it and not creating it, what's the long term impact of that?
Well, yeah, as you're talking, it's like another way, we're shaped by the things we use, shaped by what we engage with. And there's all this now shift recognizing how we've been shaped by cell phones and social media. So there's a growing, at least especially in where I live in the school districts, a move of no phones at school, like even in public schools, because of the way that it's impacting development of kids and shaping them in a way. So I'm wondering, as you're talking, as people interact with AI, like what's the positive of it? And I do think there are positives, but also what's the shaping that it's um, going about? How is it shaping us as human beings? And what will we learn about that in 10 years? Because it will take time.
Well, I mean, you made a great point there. The phones, that hasn't. I don't think we're going to look back on our phones, and I don't know from now, from when we're not going to. I don't think people are going to look back and go, "Oh, they were pretty good for humanity." Like, I think they'll be like, it started out okay, but
It started out
but
okay, and then there was,
look what
whoa, what
happened.
happened
Like,
there?
unprecedented levels of loneliness. And I
Yeah.
just saw an article in the paper today, like Britain, like 15-year-olds, like they called it a happiness or a well-being recession. It's not. So, and I think a lot of that is because they're on their phones and social media and all that. So if we bake that stuff into AI, it's like on steroids. I mean, I don't know if you've listened to Zach Stein
I
uh,
haven't, no, but I'm going to
talk
look into
about.
him after this. Yeah.
I mean, let's make sure you're in a good mood when you watch him, because you know, he's a brilliant guy and he has some really amazing points about the dangers of what we're about to do. So, yeah,
So you're
um,
saying make sure I have a friend to call right after I listen to or read up on Zach Stein.
yeah, and of course, his work is broad, and
Yeah.
he's not only talking about AI. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. Um, so I'm curious. You know, we've been talking a while. We can keep going on this AI thing, but I'm wondering if you wanted to bring in another place to go or another question you've
Yeah,
been wondering about.
yeah, sure, yeah. Um, Great. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about the worldview shift, but I think I was just thinking before we came on, like about some of the um, the shift we're going through. I mean, I could talk about that for a couple of minutes and just what might be some of the implications for coaches. And then I think you brought some amazing questions in as well as we were like planning for this. But just this sense of like this mechanistic worldview, Newtonian worldview of like fixed parts, mechanistic parts, and um, this how I think we're moving into where we recognize our interconnectedness. And actually, if you look at like the work of people like Ian McGilchrist, but also like in systems theory, uh, Dave Snowden, people like this who are, actually the relationship between things are actually more primary than the things themselves,
Right.
you know, which is kind of like at first I found that like to get my head around that pretty it was an interesting process, and Dan Siegel talks about from me to we,
Yeah.
so MWE. So this sense of like extended self that you alluded to with our phones and how it's actually the relationship between things. I think that's a high currency for transformation. Like when you start to recognize that and include that in your coaching, whether that is through more of a systemic approach, by including the world at large or the environment or the team, those perspectives inside the conversation, or even from the level of like the phenomenological felt experience of being in a flowing relationship, in the moment with your client as things are unfolding. This is, I think, it's because in a sense we're moving closer to like the currency of process, and of transformation. So, um, and I think that that I want to include something else here, which I'm curious what you think about. But the other thing we've done with modernity, I think, is like privileged like knowledge, as I said, but we've tended to like abstract out of our experience in a way.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I felt that with Wilbur when it's like the more I was learning, actually, it did light me up. It's always nuanced, but there was a point where I started to like feel burdened by the maps and that I was accumulating, and this um, sense of like I've got to like know all the maps and accumulate them all in order to get the answer, to finally know everything. And I think we're being invited into that a descent back into the immediacy of experience, and it's related to this relational quality I'm talking about, and this experience of like gnosis, of like moving from knowing about to knowing from.
Yeah.
So epistemology and ontology coming together, and it's like as we're talking about the coaching topic, we're actually um, talking about how it's showing up in this moment, and that's beautiful. But then we can drop even deeper into this sense of how the things we're exploring are actually we can start to speak and explore from how they are in this moment, and qualities often start showing up here like love, presence, strength, compassion, but just a kind of knowing, wisdom, a kind of knowing. And we start to know from those experiences rather than about them. And I find that a really thrilling experience. Um, Speaking from love, speaking from wisdom, from the sense of connection I have with another person. Thomas Hubel talks about this when word and energy cohere and word and energy connect. And I think this is an incredibly thrilling place to land inside of as a human being. It's very, very alive. And so, yeah, um, yeah, I'll leave it there and just see could bring in a couple more things, but
Well, I think that this is, to me, in some ways, we were talking about AI revealing the limitation of frameworks, and what you're pointing to me, feels like it's not about the framework necessarily or having the right knowledge, but more from where is the coach speaking, from where
yeah,
internally, and having these different maps, frameworks, models be ways of finding territory inside that I might not have been able to find on my own. And then the relational part, and this is, I think, so powerful, uh, is when I'm with someone else and they're speaking from a place that, like, oh, I didn't know that place existed, or it's been so long since I've accessed it, and you have invited me back to this place inside myself. And wow, all of a sudden I feel a little bit more me because of you were an invitation for me. You invited me back to that place. And I think that's really one of the magic parts of relationship, and we see it in our cohorts. It's just amazing to see it working, and it's often behind the scenes in the background. People don't know it's going on and until later. But the magic we can be of inviting one another into different dimensions of being a human, because we're different in some respects and the same, but it's like little awakenings. Like, oh, you just woke up a part of me that's been asleep for a long time. And that feels, wow, I didn't know that was there. That feels so wonderful. Or, whoa, pain. I haven't accessed pain like that. And I can
right.
feel whatever I feel about it, but it rounds me out.
It
So anyway,
feels
that's what I'm,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it feels right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah, that's beautiful, beautifully articulated. Yeah, and that I don't know with AI. We keep referring back to it. I think that's the joy of being together with human beings, isn't it? Where it can be vulnerable and tender, and I go in with groups sometimes, and it's like, oh, I can feel things that I don't want to feel coming online, and but it, but it, most of the time I come out feeling like that was fulfilling and enriching. So
Yeah. And I
yeah,
feel like this is part of the frontier of coaching, is leaning more into and sort of dissolving the individualist narrative, which you pointed out at the very beginning of our, when we started talking, like the individual pulls themselves up by their bootstraps, and like, no, relationship is, it's challenging for sure, oftentimes. And there's this possibility of
yeah.
enhancing our sense of ourselves, expanding that, reconnecting to different parts. And the wow, the suffering that's going on now with this loneliness pandemic, where that's not happening.
Yeah, yeah. That what you share is like, I think that's another challenge, is like we've atomized ourselves. We atomize leaders, like, so we see them as being separate from the systems they're in, or that leadership is like residing within one person. And it's another side of the coin of this loneliness kind of epidemic, in that, yeah, we actually decontextualize like a person. And I think it ties in with what we were saying earlier about like needing to have the right answer or the one thing. But in a sense, like, we're being created in every moment in each context. Me and you right now are like deeply part of one another's identity, as is the reason that we're here, the purpose of the conversation, and the room that I'm in, and the chair I'm sat on. And um, there's, and I think this gets into what some of the perennial traditions, the wisdom traditions, have pointed at, is that separate sense of self actually is part of our suffering, and not as easy to find when we start to look at it. So yeah, a lot can open up when we see the world in this way of relationality.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about, something that we're exploring here, is like this question of, like, given this in relationality and also not centering like the guru in something, and like what does it mean to acknowledge all that informed that person and being in relationship with them as a person, not as something on a pedestal. But in this move to like more collective orientation, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, about as we are kind of in this transition, because we've been talking about it in different ways, like relationality and things like that.
Mm.
In a world where personality is like how we kind of learn about something or get introduced, and like, oh, I heard about it from this person, this key author or this key speaker. So how to have that be present, because that's often how we hear about something, and maintain a sense of, yes, this is just one person though, and let me remember that they were influenced by others, and remember the group, not center just this individual personality. So anyway, I'd love to see if you have
Yeah.
anything on that, or yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think it's both
Right.
and because like it's also amazing to be around people who are just very individuated and at ease in themselves, or expressing their gifts and their, it's like thoroughly enjoyable, and something's coming through them. It's like, but even that, actually, that phrase, something's coming through them, points to maybe what's beyond their personal stuff. But I yeah, I think this is like, if I think about my own spiritual journey, the positive side of gurus, is they can inspire you, and they're charismatic, and uh, they're but that we project all our own golden qualities onto them, and
Right,
so
right, right.
um but I think what we're being invited into is I've seen this in the spiritual world happen more recently, where Scott Killerby, Jeff Foster, people like this were like, hey, you know what, like, I'm human too, and I'm fallible, and I'm struggling with things. And that's a taboo subject in the spiritual world, because a lot of spiritual teachers project this image that they're kind of perfect. And Jeff Foster writes about how he went around staying at a lot of their houses, and he was like pretty shocked about what was going on behind closed doors, and maybe he was exaggerating that a little bit. But I think, so I think we can apply that to the coaching world and the world of celebrated theorists and authors. And so I think, like, what I find inspiring are the people I'm meeting who can have both, like they're um they're not denying their greatness in a way, or their uniqueness, that there is something they can uniquely do in this life. Like, there's a unique music they're here to play, but also they're vulnerable, and they share themselves and their flaws, not out of this, nothing has to happen, but yeah, in the right moments where that feels appropriate. And they're massive supporters of others, so they they're very attuned to their own shadows, and they offer they distribute the leadership in groups. They're not always in the center of the stage. They lift others up, and others take leadership. That combination of the fluidity feels like a thrilling possibility for us, but we're not historically very good at
That's
kind
the
of being
thing, right?
together,
Yeah.
are we?
Yeah.
Like,
At least not in like Western culture. Um, and I think that's the invitation, right? That is creeping in more and more, is to have both, and to remember the group, and especially welcome more and more people who we don't traditionally welcome, or like in our whoever we might be, to see what can we learn as we have space for everybody to belong.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm just gonna look. I had other questions here. Um, oh, you had this great question that we could maybe take a look at. How can coaches remain at their developmental edges?
Yeah, I, I like this question because what I noticed was there were times where it felt like I made a leap towards my developmental edge as a coach. I mean, and what that feels like for me is that I'm with another person and I feel thrilled to be there. Like I'm almost in a flow state, but it's not exactly the same thing as being in a flow state. But there's just this sense of being at my edge, and like I just feel really alive, and I'm taking a bit of a risk, even, like there's something new and fresh about the way I'm coaching with someone. And I can contrast that to, I might be at that edge for a while, and then suddenly I might start to it might start to feel a little bit habituated, a bit normal, and like the edge starts to go away a little bit, and I'm just a little bit less excited. And it's not that we always have to be feeling excitement in a coaching conversation, but just painting a general picture. So yeah, and I just noticed the contrast between those, and I just noticed that when I was at my edge, I just felt like my coaching was just a lot better. My coaching is a lot better when I'm at my edge. That's not to say I'm not serving people when I'm not there. And actually, maybe there is a natural cycle. If you think about the path to mastery, that we do plateau at times, and then we make these leaps. So, but the thing that I started to when I actually started to notice that was the key. So I was like, oh, I can feel a little bit plateaued, a bit habituated. So that in of itself was quite powerful because it already kind of like opened my senses up to what was going on. And then what a question I found really useful was actually to start asking myself, what's the experience that I want to be having inside of the coaching session? And because I often ask myself almost the opposite, what kind of experience am I creating for my clients? Of course, they are coming in with a clear motivation, and I'm honoring that too, but um, this question of like what kind of experience do I want to be having, I found to be just really joyful to start to think about and to include myself in my own reflections on my coaching practice in that way. And there are other things I think that help us get to our edge, like being introduced to new ideas and teachers that are different than the way we're doing, so I think those are a bit more familiar to people listening. But um, yeah, I just feel there's this felt sense of being at our edge, and we're so attuned at those moments.
Mm.
And yeah,
Can you say more about when you say edge, just for people who may not be familiar with this term? Like, what is that for you? How would you describe edge?
so I think there's a way that I can describe it, both like from a kind of place of like what's it like in the moment,
Mhm.
but also, if I look at like my overall growth of a coach, as a coach, like what's going on there. And in a way, like what's it like in the moment is a little bit like what I've been describing. So um, I come into a session, and um, the theories and ways of being of a coach that I have collected are in the background firmly. And even as someone who's felt like that for a long time, like that I want to operate in what's unfolding in the coaching relationship in the moment, there are some, in a way, we're meaning making creatures. And what I've found over time is that a lot of those like maps and methods and beliefs, the axioms that I hold, they're subjective. I don't know I'm holding them. So um, there's a sense of like really being in beginner's mind, perhaps, really being in a place of um, where the unexpected kind of unfold, but not as an idea, but as
Yeah,
a
I hear you.
felt experience. And
Yeah.
um, like I just it's the same as my meditation practice. It's like, I've done a lot of open awareness meditation practice, and there's this opening into this bright, spontaneous, fresh awareness, but then the mind like reifies it subtly, quickly. It fixates experience, and that can happen very subtly, and over time with practice you start to notice that more and more. And I think there's a similar process happening. So that yeah, maybe I'm kind of saying the same thing from a different angle. Um, I feel like there's something else I could say, but it's not. Maybe I'd have to sit for an uncomfortably long amount of time. You know,
We're riding the edge at this moment where language
exactly.
isn't available, right? That's exactly what's at. We're like, well, here we are, and what do I say about it? I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's like, in a way, that your question has invited me to the edge of, so there's a sense of palpating the what might come next. So yeah, I'll yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. It's beautiful, beautiful. One of the other ways I feel edge. So I'm not going to repeat all you said. I echo it. Sometimes also edge to me feels like when I'm with a client and I can feel what would be helpful, like the helpful response, and my body is like, well, I don't have access to that right now, and that feels like edge in a different way. Like, oh, I've really reached a maybe more of a limit on my capacity on that side of the spectrum. So that's then an invitation for me to go explore that later. What's going on there? That my response was either it felt maybe it was there, but it was muted. It felt muted, and what would have been helpful is like a fuller expression of it. So what was that about?
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because like I'm like, oh yeah, that's another way of seeing edge, which is so important, so beautiful. It's like these moments in a coaching session where something happens and I'm like, what was going on for me there? Like what was that?
What was
Uh,
that?
as opposed to like other moments where I feel very clean and attuned. And so that, I think, is another. You are, in a way, it's like what I was trying to articulate, but in a beautiful, from a different way. And um, you know, one of the conversations I have with some of the coaches I know is a friend of mine, Sean Wilkinson, had this idea of mixed mystical arts. So like, so you've got MMA, like the fighting, which is all the different styles. And if you're not good at, if you're not a generalist, people have specialities, but if you can't do the jujitsu, then if they get you on the floor, you're screwed. So like his idea was like, what if we get together, like high level practitioners, and we start to kind of sense like get into some coaching, kung fu, like we wrestle and off be able to offer very refined, subtle feedback or reflections to one another, these distinctions that really open up something. And Sean is like that for me. It's like we'll explore something and he'll offer a perspective, usually from the sense of immediacy of how it's shown up in the moment. And it's like you said before, that boom, okay,
Yeah, right.
wow,
Yeah.
like okay, now I'm feeling that. Wow. But
Right.
that I think is something as coaches that is important for us to engage in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Be in a community of coaches where that kind of thing is happening and possible. It's also for me endlessly exciting to know that, oh, it's never ending here.
Yeah.
Well, Joel, I want to see if there's, we've been talking a long time and I've thoroughly enjoyed this. We might have to do this again. Um, But as we're kind of coming to the end here, I'm wondering if there's anything else you wanted to bring in before we wrap for today, question or topic.
Yeah, I think that the we can tee it up for next time. But you mentioned like the role of certifying bodies and regulation, and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That
I
might be a
think
bigger topic than.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a
just
good one. I would love to talk about that.
as a kind of cliffhanger, I saw someone post about this on LinkedIn the other day, very articulately, very very beautifully, and man, it was like a lot of responses, a lot of comments, a lot of likes to this, and the challenge was about the danger of uh, collapsing coaching into a set of static competencies, and in a sense, like rather than us training to become the masterful and mysteriously magical coaches we can be, like things getting becoming a real business, like with levels and or yeah, stages of like beginning, intermediate, mastery coaches and things. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. So this is good. We'll leave with the cliffhanger so people have to wait for the next episode to come on. So that's exactly that part. And then this other part of, because I think some of this question for me was stirred by an article again that came out of so maybe a couple of months ago. And this is, I think, another shadow of maybe more the industry, not coaching itself, are the people who are in it for maybe other kinds of purposes other than helping clients, like just making money. So there was this thing about a person who had invested tens of thousands of dollars over several years and really felt burned. And when they started talking about it, it was like, oh, yeah, because the school was like, well, the reason you're not succeeding is because you didn't do your training well enough and you need to hire us again to do your training. So it became this thing. And I was like, wow, this is so unfortunate that coaching has traction now. And of course, that it brings in people who may have other intentions around it, and how to help people navigate. This is back to that question of how to navigate this, the wide spectrum of what's called coaching, of the different levels of people's experience in terms of training and all of that. And I don't know if a regulating body is the answer, but it just, for me, brings forward this question of how to help people navigate and not be taken advantage of.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just as a last sentence from my side, like I see ethics gaining traction now in the field, which is nice. And ethics for me, I was always like, oh, ethics, yeah. But actually, it goes right into the heart of what it means to be human. It's a fascinating way to. It's actually ethics is coaching in a way. It's like, but and then the other thing is just David Drake, I think, has been writing a little bit about this dilemma of like the word coaching being diluted and different players in the field and all this. So yeah, people might want to check out his recent papers on that as well.
Well, I've really enjoyed our time together. This has been fantastic, and I do think there's a whole thing we could talk about where we're ending here and more. So I really appreciate your time, Joel, and being in conversation with me.
I really enjoyed myself, Adam, thoroughly. Yeah, I just felt a lot of aliveness and kind of enjoyment from your questions and your passion, obvious passion for what it is to be a coach.
Well, until next time, be well. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, you too.
Well, we can end there officially. And yeah, really, thanks, Joel. It was a real delight. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Just I know I can go off on one on like tangents about
oh
things. So
no, it's
I hope
great.
it
To me,
was.
I love
Yeah,
conversational nature of these things, and I
yeah,
hope people
yeah.
appreciate. As a listener, I appreciate the podcasts that have that genuine feel to it, where it's not so like staccato and like focused. It feels more alive.
Definitely, I appreciated that about you as a podcaster. Actually, I forgot to say it in the actual interview, but yeah, you hold a really nice conversational space, which I can't listen to podcasts where it's too
Right.
So, Derek,
Oh.
can you tell me? And then they answer it, and then they ask the next question as if it's too like,
Right.
well, you didn't go into that. You hardly spoke,
Yeah, exactly.
Just like, yeah, yeah,
Well, it's been great to get to know you too. I've
yeah,
enjoyed that. So
yeah. Me too. Me too. Let's keep in touch, and happy to share this when it comes out if you want me to. And
yeah, that'd be
so,
great. So I got to get on the editing, and I'll let you know, and that would be wonderful. Yeah. All right, Joel. Take care. Bye.